Everyone. We're just going to wait a second for participants to join us and then we'll get started. Okay, welcome back and welcome for some of you who may be joining us for the first time to the 2020 Farmland Access and Transfer Conference. We have a poll here. We want to just hear which of you were with us for part one. If you were with us for part one, you can maybe get a little coffee or take a quick break. We're going to introduce everybody again. So you're welcome to listen, but you did hear it before. So we're going to be quick since it looks like everyone was with us for part one. Great. So just a reminder, you're back at the 2020 Farmland Access and Transfer Conference. This is organized by Maine Farmland Trust and Land for Good, and we're glad to have all of you here. We can go to the next slide, Meg. So these are our sponsors for the conference, and we're very grateful to them for our support. In addition, funding for this event is provided in part by Phase 3 of Land for Good's Land Access Project, which is supported by a grant from the USDA's Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program. And we're back in the webinar format for the technology side. So as a reminder, this session, we will take more questions from the audience. So you can use the Q&A function or the chat. And on the chat, you can choose to send a message to everyone at the conference or only to the speakers for them to answer. And as we go into asking these questions, we do want to remind you of our community agreements to be kind, to be patient, and to be accountable. So this is a time for dialogue, but we hope you'll keep those concepts and that commitment in mind. And we'll acknowledge once again the history of colonialism that has enabled us to occupy the land we call Maine, the homeland of the Wabanaki people. We also acknowledge that 98% of privately owned farmland in the Northeast is owned by white people, and that is not an accident, but is the direct result of colonial history and of purposeful policies and practices that continue to perpetuate systemic racism to this day. Our dominant food and farming system and the institutions that govern them are steeped in histories of racism, exploitation, and oppression, and remain highly inequitable. And at Land for Good and Maine Farmland Trust, we hope that this conference is a place to take a step to listen to additional voices and be an ally for Black, Indigenous, and persons of color. And so we're very honored to have this group of panelists here today. And I want to start by introducing Olivia Moore of the Penobscot Nation, who is a co-founder and builder of Eastern Woodlands Rematriation. They work to support the revitalization of Indigenous food and healing systems, including the Wabanaki Community Herbal Apothecary and Rematriation School. They also organize with Wabanaki Two-Spirit Alliance and Wabanaki Reach. And I will turn it over now to Olivia.
All right. So since everyone polled said they were here in the first session, I'm going to just continue as if this is a continuation of that conversation and not do the formal introductions, if everyone is okay with that. So how we're going to format this, and we kind of right up into the last moment, very organically, we're discussing how it was going to flow, is that really hoping to, I really want to hear and to learn from the exchange between Suzanne, Desiree, and Kristen. And so really honored that they're willing to be in space and community together and to allow us to be a part of, sort of witnessing and engaging with their conversation. The way that participants will be able to engages. So if you're as they are discussing any questions or things that are coming up that you want to pose to the panelists, you will put in the Q&A box that I'll be doing my best to remember to attend to. And then at natural points in the discussion, I will pose those questions. I might also sort of consolidate questions, and I might also bypass questions, but really hope that you will engage and really just be thinking, even if it's different observations that you want to share, and to have the panelists maybe reflect or to share from their experience on. So this time is going to be mostly conversation, and us being able to, feed in some different, us as participants, see myself as an audience member, to kind of witness that, and again, to get some answers for us from our perspective. And anyways, really looking forward to this being a little bit more of a natural conversation space for them this afternoon. And so to sort of one of I'm going to offer a framing question for them to sort of jump off from. And so one of the threads that I heard in the first session, that I think, just thinking from the lens of the audience, that I think would be incredibly helpful to hear more about from each of your perspective, each of your communities, and the work that you're doing, is to share some more specifics around land use agreements, harvest agreements, cultural use agreements, collective land holding, instances of farming on the land of other farmers, like to really kind of slow down and talk about what some of those mechanisms have looked like, have felt like, where they have been useful, where they could be strengthened. I think those might be some pieces that could answer questions for folks, and would also be able to share more of like the really powerful, rich work that you all are doing. And so I encourage you all to, again, for this to be a conversation of like talking about what has it been like, engaging with developing land use agreements, and explore some of that together. So I don't know if there's someone who's biting at the bit to start on that, but I will let someone self-select.
And it's funny because I met Suzanne around this topic. So I'm like, I know that she's got this. Like, I'm just gonna wait for Suzanne to go. But yeah, I also think it's beautiful that we're all comfortable with silence, and just also, I'm sure, a little bit out of respect to just give space for someone who does feel the urge to talk. And I think in our current culture and system, I notice now with Zoom, there's just so many people that are uncomfortable with silence and patience. So anyway, that was a really nice pause. So I have never, actually the closest thing I ever had to like a land use agreement was either verbal, reading old documents of agreements that are null and void or ignored. And working towards some sort of acknowledgement of access rights. So after I graduated, and I was a youth in my mid-20s, I went and worked for the Boston Harbor Islands National Park. It's a unique park. It's managed by multiple agencies: federal, state, nonprofit, city, municipality, and it's like a 12 membership governing structure, as well as an advisory board. So there's a lot of complexity to navigate there, but it also gives a little bit of flexibility too, depending on the partners who are a little bit more flexible or liberated in their practices. There is a mandate for the National Park Service to consult with Indigenous folks of the local area. And interestingly, you know, those federal mandates sometimes only pertain to federally recognized tribes, but that was not the case with the Boston Harbor Islands. Rightfully so, the closest tribal communities of lineal descent that connect to those islands, first and foremost, the Massachusetts peoples, whose original homelands those are, and then also Nipmuc people who were forcefully removed and have burial sites out on those islands. So there was already a system or a process in place, but you know, really for a very long time, it was a struggle of trying to navigate that and figure out where the voice of my peoples belong in those conversations. And oftentimes I found that, you know, it was to an extent that the agencies were able to comply with their mandates, not necessarily for any real effort towards liberating, acknowledging the sovereign rights of our peoples. It was more so asking us to show up at meetings at their scheduled times, which often were during the work day. So that really limited the participation of a broader community. And when we were there, it was really just about their agenda. It wasn't really, there wasn't this kind of co-management or cooperation. And so long story short, after like 5 years of struggling that, I was also a youth worker. So I was not only advocating land rights for my Indigenous relatives, most urban youth I were advocating for land rights for Black youth. And helping them see that they were so closely connected to pretty much undeveloped landscape, even though, you know, they were less than 2 miles from these islands, even though they're living in urban areas and have very little green space. So I found in that same experience, there was a lot of just a little bit of tokenizing, you know? And so that's kind of been my experience with any sort of cooperation or dialogue around agreements with institutions of great power like that, like the Department of Interior and state and city agencies, even nonprofits. Thompson Island Outward Bound owns Thompson Island and Boston Harbor, and there we would host residential programs for Native youth. And it did allow for some flexibility, like some places where fires aren't allowed, we were able to talk about fires being central to our cultural lifeways, to our healing, and to our time spent together. And so, you know, there were agreements made in spaces like that where there was a little bit more flexibility. But when it comes to the Department of Interior, it's like so difficult. And it's crazy because I think back and none of those conversations were ever about sourcing our food or our medicines. I remember one time an employee of the National Park Service that does a lot of the resource management had said, "Hey, can you tell me about some of these plants? I'd love to know how we could use them." Like it just was more of a kind of one way, again, that concept of like kind of just extracting knowledge, or, you know, I'm useful when I'm able to benefit the agency or the person that has the power and the control. And then that experience actually led me to pursue a graduate degree in environmental conservation at UNH. Fortunately, from this work, I got a free ride. That was great, but it was not enjoyable being someone from a social science background that was going into hard science disciplines to try to humanize their understanding of resource management. In fact, I like completed most of my degree and then kind of just, I remember I was ready to give birth towards the end, and I was a single parent, and I was like, this is the hardest thing of my life and I'm just ready to go. And this was not filling me. It was not, you know, my approach to that was participatory action research, because I didn't want whatever the outcomes of my studies to just be a book on someone's shelf. I took the opportunity to engage the natural resource manager, the city archaeologist, scientist, people from the community, like literally around a big table, looking at the management practices and structures, and really trying to bring in Indigenous philosophies and find ways that that there could be some co-management or adaptation to Indigenous understandings. And I think the work still continues today. I still serve as an advisor, but it's like, it's been over a couple decades and we're still having the same conversations. I'm still showing up to the table feeling highly invisibilized. We still have never been invited to just come and have ceremony, or if a tree is going to be knocked down and we know that tree could be utilized for one of our mishuns, or you know, there's medicinal plants. I don't even think that the dot is connected, that these are still relatives and ancestors of ours, and that perhaps they could go to good use. I've gone out on volunteer citizen science days, and I've literally witnessed people just round up tons of invasive species and just dump it. And I'm like, this is so backwards to any sort of way that I would show up to this work. And so I guess the point of my story is that even after really hard work in grad school and thinking that the degree would hold some weight, there's still just such a lack of understanding of relationship and relationality, and the power that these landowners hold. And any sort of, I don't know, this is where I could hear maybe from the audience, like, is there a self-understanding or awareness of the positionality and the power dynamics there? And what would happen if I just asked them, hey, you know, we know that you have A, B, C, D medicinal plants out there. We're trying to build a community apothecary. COVID has struck our communities really hard. We need to get these medicines distributed to our people and held in our territories, because we, you know, we lack access to these things. How would you feel about us coming and doing this? And I feel I'd be hit with all sorts of regulations and reasons why the structure is not flexible enough to allow that to happen. So I have lots of other experiences around it. Hopefully I'll be able to share a little bit more, but I want to give space for others.
I can speak a little bit to that. I was trying to find my notes from the conversation I had earlier this morning about like land trust and conservation easement stuff. But I really liked what Kristen said, and I feel like those experiences are really heartbreaking. You know, when people want you, say they want you at the table, but you realize their structures doesn't allow you to actually, for them to hear you. It's like, and also the way that they also have been trained doesn't allow them to hear you. So I work, I have a couple different research projects that I work with, but one is for a national park system to work for this plant use agreement. So in 2016, there was a federal law change, a rule change where, so national park systems can enter into a federal agreement or an agreement, because there was all these agreements before, but they were all like handshake deals, right? So like the superintendent had a relationship with the tribe, and there was agreements that were happening, but nothing supported that in law at times. Sometimes it did, but it was all variable. There was no one sort of rule that would work for everybody. And I'm not supporting this rule. I don't think it's really challenging for us still. So anyways, there was this movement to ensure that, to restore native harvesting in national park systems. And this rule got written, and in that, during that comment period, there was a lot of comments on it. There's a lot of negative responses for this rule, where people wrote in like, how do you know that Native people will harvest sustainably? You know, National Park Service is one of their what they're supposed to do is protect this environment. So in that rule now is required that for any species gathered, there has to be an environmental assessment conducted for each plant. So you're right. If you said, we need these plants now, there's no way they would say yes to that. They'd have to go through so much red tape, right? All of this stuff that federal government is always bogged down with. And also oftentimes in that EA, the information that supports an environmental assessment is usually done by a scientist. That's usually a non-native person, generally within our park system. And they would use published research to support their findings, right? And so if there's no published research on a sustainability practice, chances are they would deny that access to that plan, right? Because if there's no findings, that means they can't say yes, they don't know. And that's how they would perceive it. And so what we do in Acadia is, well, seeing this plant rule come through and knowing that people had denied access to sweetgrass stands, traditional sweetgrass areas, sweetgrass became the relative that we wanted to focus on first for people. And that came from the gatherers themselves. It wasn't like we chose that. And we figured out with Acadia that we had to actually publish some research about the sustainable practice of harvesting sweetgrass, because if not, it probably wouldn't have gone through that rule, that agreement to that rule would have gone through. So we're in the process right now of getting that written up and publishing the sweetgrass research. And then we're still in the project of relationship and engagement. There's so much more about to a cultural use agreement, which is what we'll be under. There's then how does that resource gets monitored? Is it a Western framework that monitors the sustainability of this resource? Can Indigenous people, can we shift the monitoring practice? I don't know, there's quite a bit. Also, we've now hired a lawyer to work with an MOU to help us to sort of frame the relationship that we want with the park, where it's not like this is just handed to us and then we have to do what they say, but we actually give something back to them and say, this is how we want you to protect us. You know, we don't want people watching us. This is the appropriate way to engage with Native people. Also in the future, when you do research with Native people, you should have a Native researcher. In the past, this is like one of the first times they've had, not one of the first times, but it's not very often they have Native research or research about Native people conducted by a Native person, right? Which seems absurd, but it's true. And so most of the time they go outside the community, oftentimes because it's a relationship. I would say it's not intentional, but it's their own peer group of who they know that does this kind of research. And so in that MOU, we want to say that we want to issue that if you're going to conduct research with Native people, you should have a Native researcher as a co-PI. So that's one thing. So that's an Acadia National Park. That's like a federal relationship. That's and oftentimes in those federal relationships, they are ruled by all these conservation practices that slightly more of like this preservationist model that they have to show this sustainable harvest limit, which is something we run with land trust too. We're now engaging with a lot of land trusts to restore Wabanaki harvesting there. And the first question we get asked is, well, how do you know what the sustainable harvest limit is? Right. So we're constantly having to deal in this Western science box anytime we want to harvest things. And we don't have a sustainable harvest limit. That's not how people do things. And oftentimes that harvesting practice is very different per person. There's a lot of variation in how people harvest. And I think personally, that's part of the sort of sustainable use practice, right? There's variation exists constantly in Native worldview, right? There's not one truth to things. There's multiple creation stories in one nation. There's multiple ways to say things. The idea that there's only one way is a Western perspective, I think. And that gets put onto us a lot to defend, to say what is our harvest limit, and they want numbers, like that doesn't exist. And almost if we don't have those things, it's a challenge to push through to push conservationists to think differently, to reach outside of their own understanding of how to value something. And then I also work in sort of with Irving a little bit with these timberlands to under the Forest Stewardship Certification, so FSC. And one of those principles, they're supposed to uphold Indigenous practices. So we are using that to sort of create, tree harvesting agreements. And that's under a cultural use permit as well. It's funny, as people always use cultural use permits, but they have different regulations with them. Another one too is I actually was just talking to a land trust lady today about, so in some of these presentations, I get asked, like, is there any sort of conservation easement for Indigenous harvesting where a landowner can put that into law that this land will always have access for native harvesting? And I was recently asked those questions and I don't know. I said, I didn't know, I didn't think so. And so I talked to a woman who did some research on it, and she was saying, yeah, there is nothing, that culture and conservation easements don't allow that to happen in Maine. Only the state of California recently changed their law like 2 years ago to include Indigenous cultural, I'm trying to think the wording, cultural resources, so that now they can actually say this conservation easement is for Indigenous harvesting or allows Indigenous harvesting, but majority of the states, including Maine, does not allow that to happen. So maybe that's something we also work on. Like sometimes landowners are asking for it, and there are no tools that exist for landowners to allow that to happen or to ensure that will happen in the future. So.
So everything that said is really important. I guess I'll just add a little bit, maybe from it's the same field, maybe from a different, I guess, line of work. I guess in terms of a little bit of what I do and my organization does, we do a lot of community education, and part of that does include that work of, we work with some of these things. I can't go into huge detail because a lot of the work we do is contracted and NDAs are signed. So I can't get into some huge details, but we have worked with different entities, government entities, state parks, or we're going to work with some state parks. We've worked with some other organizations in the environmental field to be more inclusive, to center more diverse voices, and decolonizing a little bit of the work they do. A lot of people and entities, there's some people who, I won't say everybody, but there are people out there, part of these entities and organizations that are either they're feeling pressured by media or society and some shifts that are happening, or it's more authentic and truly seeing, the historical trauma that has been happening by being exclusive, or like Suzanne said, some of these things may be unintentional in terms of relationships within their peer groups, and just having that education from my organization is Black, Brown, Indigenous, founded, run, and being able to, we have different consultants come on too. So we just try to get that, those voices centered. For an example, right out of graduating from anthropology and Native American studies, I myself was walking in the forest, just wanted to do archery, gather a little bit, and a landowner from a pretty powerful entity of the state was just like, what are you doing? This is dangerous. You can't do this here. And eventually, immediately, I felt super offended. I said, I'm Indigenous, I want that trust that I know what I'm doing. And this person, oh, you're Wabanaki. And then I felt even more distanced, because now what right do I have as a Taino woman right now to be doing any of this? And then it really hit me like, this is really hard to just practice my culture. So then I just, had a little bit of a conversation, made a few contacts, and then eventually was able to, I do a lot of nonprofit administration work. I do a lot of proposal work. So right immediately I was just like, got into that mode where I'm constantly either in an indigenous world, and I can operate in an indigenous woman, as an indigenous woman, and in that way, and I don't know how else to explain it. And then kind of in a Western way. So immediately I was like, okay, I'm going to write up a proposal, talk to different stakeholders, kind of like what Kristen was saying, having that human social aspect mixed with that other aspect of forestry and environmentalism, and trying to almost like appeal to that side, but also not erase the cultural side and the spiritual side of why it's so important to be able to access a space for healing and cultural activities, not just for myself, but for other Indigenous people in the area that and in the entity it was pertaining to. And so that ended up following through, and now we are able to have access to that space. But it took really somebody on the opposite side. They're not opposite, we're all on the same side, but someone not from an Indigenous space, taking the time to not get frustrated, have ego, to not feel like mine, but more like, oh wow, this is so important. I totally understand. I never thought of it that way, and let's go into some cultural agreement. And it got to the point that it was just like, in order for us to be able to access this space exclusively, without having other people come in and be like, hey, we want to access this space too, and like disrupt things we're doing, we had to keep it private. And that's why I'm like talking in this like discreet way, because it's like we have to even protect a space that's not even ours, even though it's its own. But it's like, I guess that I don't know how else to explain it. So yeah, but in a little bit about my organization, and some other people in my organization. I know Molly's not here, so I don't want to speak for Molly and what Molly is doing, but my organization, we're hoping to be able to have more land access, and that's going to take a lot of work with landowners and farmers and land trusts.
So I think in the spirit of dialogue, there's a couple things I just want to respond to with what Suzanne said and then what Desiree said. Like Suzanne, yeah, I think I wrote down just like, can you imagine, like if we think of our plant relatives as kin, right? Like it's almost like, would anyone here, would anyone in the the attendees be comfortable with someone like second guessing you before you're about to leave the hospital with your newborn baby? Like, would they be saying like, are you sure you're gonna take care of them properly and make sure that they're fed and that they grow up to be a human contributing to society? And I mean, that is what it feels like. And it's so rooted in this, it's so rooted in the ideology of the United States, of just that this exceptionalism, this idea that there's only, like you said, Suzanne, one way. That and it's hard because we have to witness it be devoid of so much life, of so much joy, and possibility. We have to witness people live a way that is still very much the opposite of life-centered. It's very much I did see a question come up of like, we're in a me world. It's very individualistic. It's very much tied to what's in the immediate. What am I going to get out of it? A concern over others, right? That came up for me, and being at the Trustees of Reservation. I mean, I think one thing for us that we're looking for here, some Nipmuc folks, we're looking for places that we can tap trees. And there's been so many times that I've walked woodlands and I'm like, will anyone notice if I just get some taps up there? Like, and if I ask permission, is someone going to say, well, then we're going to have to open it up for everybody? And that's not that's not what we're talking about, you know? And it's just such a humiliating experience to go through. It's humiliating to be questioned over whether we have the intellect and the ability to caretake our relatives. And, you know, truth of the matter is, I'm sure there are many people that have overconsumed or caught up in a way that, you know, maybe it's a fisherman forced to live his life as a commercial fisherman. And, you know, and you could ask reasonable questions of whether there's overfishing or if it has detrimental impact to the environment. But, you know, these systems were imposed on us. These systems, we struggled, actually, we struggled and we lost lives trying to push back against these systems that now people are saying, oh, wait, look at what we've done, you know, and come give us insight on how we might erase it, or no, your insight's not knowledgeable. Oh, that's impossible. The system could never handle that. There's too many bureaucracies. So let's just hold those contradictions there. The other, Desiree, I just wanted to share like some things, you know, to be completely candid, some things that came up for me and the things that you were sharing, right? And just being in a space, knowing that like I too, right, in the lands, in my ancestral lands, am struggling for that sort of access to just being Indigenous woman in my homeland, and to hear, first, I'm sorry that that happened to you, and then I'm also happy that there was some reconciliation around it. And then I got to just be honest with what came up for me and being like, well, wait, like, you know, what about the people that still haven't had that access, have struggled all these years? Because the truth of the matter is, you know, Indian country is small. We know everybody, it's a small population, but we can't be everywhere all at once. And so, plus we're forced in the system that we've got to work these full-time jobs, we've got family we're caretaking, you know, a dismantled, what would be a traditional village community life. You know, we're forced into this kind of nuclear model that doesn't really provide for the level of support and we need. So I guess I'm just getting to the point of like, it's hard to be everywhere and find these opportunities. And so I have to be honest, I felt a little resentful in hearing that. But then I caught myself in saying, well, one, there was an aspect when you said I'm just an Indigenous woman, I could relate to that. Like I could identify to that. And knowing that you have had to leave your homelands and be here. But the other is I've also seen you do a lot of the work within the community. And, you know, it's not to say that it's great and it's not to say that it's not great. It's just to say I'm acknowledging that I see you. Like I see you taking time to organize and to ask questions and to relate. I don't know that I necessarily see that a lot in this area among the Taino community, but I could be wrong. I hope that that is something that could be shared more broadly of like, you know, it is really important to give acknowledgement and not just like a land acknowledgement, right? Like that's becoming super trendy these days, but an acknowledgement of like, I see you and I know that you struggle here too for rights, and how can we, like I use the word accomplice, like how can we be accomplices together in this? Like how can we realize that we don't have to get scared about what the oppressive system is trying to teach us, that if we share, we're somehow losing out. So anyway, I just wanted to, and for the spirit of dialogue and conversation, wanted to share what was coming up for me.
Yeah, so just to bounce back and forth from that, thank you for sharing that. So specifically with that example I gave, anything I do in my organization does relating to land, we center Wabanaki voices. A leader in this field of conversation was on that table making decisions, and that was really important to me. The language people named the land, and it was very centered for Wabanaki people, and Wabanaki people have access to it. So for me, I'm not, even if I couldn't access it, I would have done it just for Wabanaki people to access it. So I guess to answer that, and yeah, I do hope to see more collaboration. I know that at least for my tribe, Iayagua, we only have maybe a few people from your area living there. A lot of my tribe is in New York area, Connecticut, and South, as well as in the islands. But yeah, and definitely if you ever want connections, I'm happy to make those.
Yeah, there's a great statement question that came in, and I'll read it, saying, there's a painful irony in having to navigate colonized systems for Indigenous sovereignty examples, having to find published resource for cultural harvest, purchasing stolen land through colonized bank systems. Seems like settler colonized, or I would say settler colonizers still have control and all the power. How do you see these power dynamics shifting for just transformation, liberation? And I'll just say, because yeah, a thread that I was picking up on that I feel very deeply in my daily existence from you all was like tired, right? And just like, one, the weight of the work that we're trying to do for our communities, and just the beautiful work that is, period. Like that work alone of like of cultivating food and teaching our children and building community and, you know, caretaking, you know, in our lives. But then the weight and the process of these relationships, these processes, these permissions, these everyone else's time frames, and just like the reality of trying to like have the power to to continue it every day. There's a lot. So so that question of, let me go back to how do you see these power dynamics shifting for a just transformation, liberation? I had another piece to the question that I wanted to kind of tack on there. Oh, and it kind of connected to a question in the first session that was around like how to be an accomplice. And so one of the things, I'll just say one quick thing for me, and then I'll pass it off to others. I'm like, one of the things that's coming up a lot is having a lot of asks of intellectual and emotional labor that people that white folks like aren't recognizing as like, so I'm hearing the participants saying education, you know, like settler folks need to get educated. When you are asking Indigenous people, Black, brown, like people to educate you in any sort of way, they need to be compensated. That is like the reality. Like it is labor. It is a weight of labor. We often like field far more questions and take on far more work than we actually want to, because we feel it is necessary for the survival of our people. And as Kristen started her comments with, is like, this is not chosen work. Like this is necessary work for our survival. It is a lot. And so I'm really like, pay people, like compensate people, recognize when you are making an ask, and just like, I think that's an important like piece of the equation. And I'll pass it off if anybody else wants to say something.
I'll address or talk about maybe the initial, like, do I see the shifts in power dynamics? I think we all, like in a community, an Indigenous community, or even the broader Indigenous community, like we all have different ways of approaching it, right? Like we all have different skills, and we've chosen to do different things. And there's, you know, one way that I've chosen to do it is to kind of be in the system of academics and to shift from within. So I see a lot of shift that's happening, not shit, but shift. So it sounded like I said, I didn't mean to say it that way. A lot of shift that is happening from within within research, more like there's a lot more peers that are are able to control what's happening, in the sense that we are setting the table, right? We're not coming to the table as much and waiting to be asked. In my research, our research, kind of largest wheatgrass research, we are, the co-PI and I are setting the table of who gets to come there. And that includes, we have, it's not just one Native person that's coming. We have a Native harvest, or sweetgrass harvesters of 10 Native people from different nations that are at the collective table that's making decisions. And it's me and a co-PI that are running the conversations. And the natural resource people are sitting and listening, and then asking how can they contribute, which is how that lawyer came about, because it was from gatherers saying, how do we trust you? How do we trust that, that you might have access to our Indigenous knowledge, or that how will we feel protected into this landscape, or how is law enforcement going to approach us in the salt marsh? So all of those questions got asked, and in response, because the money actually is coming from the National Park System, they're finding the funding to support our research. And so in that funding, they've chosen to pay for a lawyer to write for an MOU, because from our suggestions, from us saying, this is what we need. So we now get to set the table, but it requires us to be in that system for a long time, right? Like getting a PhD is not, this is my daughter, you can see her Barbie. A PhD it takes a long time to sit, to not have power, right? To listen to what people are telling me in a way that I didn't necessarily agree with, but I had to go along with for a while. And so there is this power shift, and there's more people I see in academia that are controlling and are setting the standards of research. Indigenous research methodologies is just expanding, and that we have more and more examples of that happening, which has been pretty cool. It's slow. It's definitely, this change is very, very slow, but it's going to be slow. Okay, I have to hold on. Sorry.
I wanted to be able to add, I guess, thinking about the question, our work around, I guess, land, without going into the second question. But I think what goes hand in hand with that, which I think Suzanne had talked about, is that we're all doing this work from different angles. And some of the work that a lot of different organizations and groups in the greater Bangor area, including Racial Equity and Justice, my organization, is protecting descendants, either descendants of Indigenous people or Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities and people who identify as Indigenous now. And we all know that, even whether we're doing it now or our ancestors were, and that was disrupted by colonialism, the attack on ourselves is an attack on the land. And so a lot of the work we do is survival and thriving work, being able to get resources into those communities that are exploited and attacked, harm reduction methods, food, water, mediation when it comes to racism being experienced, people being displaced from their neighborhood because of racism, people who work the land and they're being displaced because their rural area is racist. So to be able to protect biodiversity and to be stewards of the land, being able to do that means that we have to be in a place where we can do that. And a lot of us can't do that if we're in prison, if we are being harmed or overcoming trauma and maybe experiencing some other things that keep us from from being able to do that work. So I think that, as well as I know Kristen had mentioned a little bit about, even missing people in our communities, doing work around that. It's really important that to do this work, we have to be alive and here, healthy and, existing. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I just want to take a minute to think deeply about power and like the different definitions of it, right? Because if we think about the way, like the power systems that are in place exactly as they were intended and designed to be. So in terms of also, like, I'm seeing that question around being an accomplice come in. I think these completely relate. So, we can say that we're a partner or we're an ally. And I guess when I use the term accomplice, I'm just like, how are you rolling up the sleeves and like really ready to like, to take the heat and the trauma and the pain in the way that we do. It will never be exactly the same if you don't have this lived reality, right? But it's a little bit of balance, right? So that's the other term that is just kind of coming to my mind. But these power systems, I mean, anything to shift, I can't apologize for my kind of radical ideas. I'm a little hesitant coming into spaces because I don't want, what I share is really important to me and the people that teach me, right? Because like the work I'm doing, I'm just one, like on that long trajectory of thousands of years that our ancestors have been here. Like I'm just like the little glimpse, talk about individualism as opposed to collectivism. Like that's why I don't even feel comfortable with like bios or titles. Like I'm just a person, and hopefully I support the joy and beauty that my children deserve and that their children will deserve and that our relatives and kin deserve, right? I feel strongly, I can't help but be political. Our existence is political. I don't know how things can change without a complete dismantling of the system that was designed to like other, silence, destroy. How do you shift something so embedded in the ideologies of what it means to be American? And we're seeing that play out. We're seeing, yeah, and forgive me that I'm going to make a little bit of analogy. I did this in my workspace and I wondered, why am I making this analogy? So I just participated in my first community chicken processing, and I had no idea about the shutter. I had no idea about witnessing that and what it could mean. And so I don't mean to compare this because I feel like that's a very sacred moment and process. I just almost kind of to see that that the United States is reaching this point of like struggle, right? Of struggle of like, wait a minute, everything I know might be changing and shifting. And I'm not afraid of that. Because we know as Indigenous people, nothing's static. It doesn't stay the same all the time. And so our life work has always been adaptability and thinking further ahead enough for how we'll survive into the future with knowing that change is a constant, change is a given. And so I kind of feel in a way like I'm witnessing a little bit of shuddering, and I'm wondering if that's a breaking through and that's the spirit leaving and going somewhere else. I'm like, how can we build anew? So I'm looking at power in that sense, right? Power over. And then I'm asking everybody that's here in this space, the attendees, to think about the power that we hold each and every day, right? That power is beautiful. Like it's beautiful that we have agency, we have ability, we have a gift or a purpose. And that can look like somebody who has relatives that are resourced, has access to a waterway, has voice, has command. Some people just have a really great way of delivering harsh messages and making people feel safe. I'm just asking everybody here to think about like, what power do you hold? And how do you see that you could potentially respond to some of the issues and struggles that we name today? And how can you make a choice every single day of how you want to channel that power in a way that creates conditions for liberation and for change? And it can be a scary thing, but I guess I'm just asking folks to lean into it. And as always, you know, it would be in consent, it would be in relationship, it wouldn't be a savior mentality of like, I've got all this and I can help you, right? Like what we're communicating to everybody here is that we're tired of being demeaned as if we don't have our own agency and knowledge and intellect. Like, I mean, I can draw upon so many examples. Like my ancestors knew to bury the Mishuns in the water over the winter. Like, how do you know that? I've been to, you know, sacred sites where people have wrote about the stone markers saying it couldn't have been the natives. How would they have moved those stones? And you know, we know our ancestors were extremely intelligent and smart, resourceful, and practice sustainability and conservation, and could offer all of us a way out of this. But it takes people recognizing their power to be able to humble themselves and allow system to rebalance, allow balance to shake out. And so again, going back to that, you may not have been the one to create, you know, all of these policies within the National Park Service, or you may not have been the one to create, you know, or, you know, to be quite honest, like you talked about it, Olivia, like Indian Head Farm. I mean, you didn't name it, but a lot of people probably don't realize it was actual and factual, that a lot of farmlands were acquired because of bounties on our ancestors' heads. And so that, and most of those people weren't even acquiring the land themselves. They were just making the money from it. And so the people who purchased used their power to then exert additional power. And so your property that you're sitting on, you might say, has this, usually it always like, oh, my family's been farming this land since the 1700s, like in, at least where I'm from, like we know what that means, right? We know what that means. And someone had mentioned the deeds in a chat, and I'm like, liberate the deeds. Like that's another way. Let's liberate the deeds, because I bet you some of them are burned and we can't find them. And the ones that we can are probably on a museum shelf in a vault somewhere where no one can read it or access it. The other ones that might be more in open could be questionable. Why did my ancestors sell off 2 acres of land because somebody was fined for stealing something from their master? You know, they really did that. There's also a sign in my town that my ancestors granted the burial site to Oliver Peabody. I'm sorry, we can read right through it. Like that would never happen. And so all around us, we have these signs of just continued exerting of power and control. And then what makes it so painful for the work that we do, being in the conservation land movement, is that we then hear the descendants of these people say, how are we going to save the world or save the planet? Like our things are dying. We need to conserve. You know, spending thousands of dollars on mitigations, but still not inviting us to a seat at the table or diminishing the contributions that we can bring. And I can tell you, like, I don't need a degree. If you give me the opportunity to connect to some of my ancestral lands and our relatives, our kin, our plants, our medicines, and our people, trust that miracles can happen. And we, you know, land has memory, land's mnemonic, and we interact, and we hold that power. That's the power that we hold. And I think that power is a major threat to capitalism. And every one of us here is benefiting from it. So our choice in being accomplices is, how do we dismantle that system? And this is significant because I know everybody here is probably needing to farm the land to make some sort of income. How do you live in the contradictions of these worlds, knowing capitalism is not going to survive? And so another way to be an accomplice is to figure the way out. Start doing the work now.
Yeah, I feel like so much power there, so much, so much. I just want to share, and so this is kind of connected. Yeah, so like one of the questions about deeding land, Kristen naming like that's not the only way that we need to or have related to the land. It could be an intermediary step, right? The return, the like land back. I know people have heard of hashtag land back, the land back movement, returning land to indigenous people of that land. And so if that in this current system is returning deeds, let's do that, right? That gives indigenous people opportunity to begin restoring our deep relationships with the land and being able to create a level of, because there's as we're struggling with recognizing like the contradictions of this reality of capitalism, failing capitalism, and knowing that we need something else, you know, but this is scary, right? Like what's beyond? We don't have the answers. We don't know what it's going to be. And there's some sense of false security, right? In this reality, right? From those paychecks that you know is going to come next week or every 2 weeks. But that is still incredible vulnerability. That we are still like, true security comes in deep relationship and community with humans and more than human. And indigenous people who have had millennia of relationship with the land, when given ability to have access, will be able to restore a lot of those lifeways that would be restorative for all people. That would be restorative for all people, so that when this all does collapse, when there is no such thing as the deeds, you want indigenous people to be in positions of living in like culturally reflective and value-centered ways, but you want the indigenous people of where you're living to be strong and sovereign, because they are going to buoy you when this all right, like, and you want to be in good genuine relationship. And so I'll just like really quickly name like a few things that are going on for Eastern Woodlands Rematriation that feel like some of these intermediary steps that can be done now while we're in this framework that we're in, recognizing them not as the landing spot for liberation. But yeah, there is work there. There's land being returned. There are private landowners who are like recognizing that land needs to be returned to indigenous people. We don't have the blueprint for exactly how that's going to look. We don't know all of how like the legal paperwork is going to work out, but we're committed to, through relationship, continuing to figure that out together. We just recently had a farm, and we have to figure out what this looks like. Don't know. I have more questions than answers, but a recent farm in May who made a commitment to a voluntary land tax, and also to allow, you know, our collective of indigenous food and medicine producers to have access to farm infrastructure, and has also, you know, committed labor of their incredibly like eager, you know, staff on the farm. There's some really concrete things that can be done now that, again, are not the end point of liberation, but that are the steps towards deepening relationship and supporting the sovereignty and rematriation of the indigenous people where you are. So, and it's also the community herbal, the Wabanaki Community Herbal Apothecary, and we put out a call to Maine herbalists, settler herbalists, to like step up and to provide medicines as we're having COVID cases in tribal communities. And they are showing up. My house is filled with medicines, and it is beautiful. And it is the necessary work. It's not the end point, but that's what it looks like, and it is possible. I'm gonna pause there because I'm getting all fired up, but I'd like to to pass it over to Suzanne, Desiree, Kristen.
I think it is great. I do see, you know, as a tribal councilwoman, I do see there's definitely a difference between, you know, Wabanaki people have done a really great job in terms of paving the way for future generations, and also Wabanaki people right now, in the academic fields, in you know, building relationships in herbal communities, and all different sectors that relate, to be able to get some of the responses. Obviously, I'm not saying that every response is great, because there's definitely some on the opposite side here that, you know, it's white community members being very hostile, in disagreement. But I feel like that's one thing that I see Wabanaki people being very powerful and being able to, you know, the relationships aren't one-sided, but being able to build those relationships. I know that just people like come to mind, Sherry Mitchell, doing Healing Turtle Island, just being able to create those spaces for relationships to be built, in that education of reciprocity, and you know, centering in these topics of climate change or environmentalism, centering water rights and land sovereignty. And I see a lot of Wabanaki people, you know, adding Black liberation into there as well, which is really amazing. I know for my tribe, it's been a little bit harder, because we are so spread out across many different places to be able to create different relationships. But we have been doing that a lot through more education and academic spaces. But in terms of, you know, relationships building around our non-human relatives, and that's been a little bit harder. In the islands, it comes more natural as our ancestral lands, but it's really amazing to, you know, be able to see that for different tribes. Even though I'm not Wabanaki, I'm always celebrating the strides that y'all make. So.
I wanted to give I feel like I have a really positive contribution of ideas of things, and then a little bit of critique that I think is important. So yeah, I'm part of Eastern Woodlands Rematriation Collective, and the beauty of the collective is that it's really kind of like a center space for exchange, for networking, for resourcing, and you know, if it's okay that I'll share, like, we were invited to a land rematriation conversation, and the context for us here just wasn't similar aligned, but it was an acknowledgement that, like, we see your interest in the work that you're doing as completely valid, and how do we support? Here, I think we're really grappling with is land ownership. You know, yeah, I guess it's that question, like, right, and kind of like what Olivia was saying, you know, we have more questions than answers. How do we decolonize or create liberated landscapes in a system that is has actually been harmful, right? And so we're questioning, like, is land ownership even the answer, right? I think the ultimate goal would be to have the same kind of social political structures that we had before colonization, where there was these, you know, years and years and years of formation in a way that was more of distributed power. It's not to say that it was perfect. Olivia had a conversation the other day, we were just talking about it was really balance was the end goal. Having something, an equilibrium was the end goal. And so I just struggle with the idea of buying land, knowing that, like I said, nothing's ever static or stays the same. Like, we have to contend with changes in climate. We have to contend with the fact that, you know, right now there's a huge, another category 5, a huge storm that's about to hit Central America, and people are fleeing, and we've had that happen in Turtle Island. Like, we have to contend with the fact that Our climate is always changing, and there may be refugee situations that having a conservation easement that says, you know, you can't build here, it's not real. Like, that's not realistic. You're bounding the land in a way that doesn't give any sort of flexibility for survival. So again, flipping to that life-centered ideology. So we're just right now trying to work on different strategies for reestablishing those kinship relations. And we work at a farm right now. It's not ideal, but the farm has provided us with an acre of planting fields. It's a very significant historical site. And it's actually within Wampanoag territory. And so much of our practice too has been to try to invite tribal members from that community into the space to establish the relationship. But to just start right now with visiting these sites that provide sustenance and that have incredible medicines or opportunities for growth. And so, yeah, we just, that's where we had our chicken processing. And so the farm was really great with providing a lot of infrastructure. We grew a ton of beans this year, and a nearby farmer opened up his warehouse and had like this really cool equipment that you pedal a bike and it would shell all the beans. And I can't even tell you how many hours that saved us of time. And it was really just like, hey, here's the key. Feel free to come. You know, it shouldn't be that we're like crawling and begging for access or for trust or for or needing to explain or justify why we're looking to feed our families and connect with our relatives in that way. And then the other thing that he also has access to a fishing run, so was just offering place for people to come and fish. I'm trying to think. Oh, another good example is in Holyoke, Mass, there's a group of gleaners who go and glean all the farms at the end of the year. And like this year was just overabundant in extra produce that was available. And so that helped us reflect on like, okay, maybe we shouldn't be struggling so much to grow all this, knowing that this is going to be available. But just a story with that is that we made sure that got distributed to other families. And then with the collective funds that we have, we were able to source some processing monies for like elders, for people who work in the gig economy, have lost opportunities because of COVID. Like, we're planning to do a widespread distribution of like family food boxes. And now we can add that in, like, you know, elder so-and-so made this like traditional applesauce recipe and you're all getting it now in your box. Like it was a great way for them to just get some income coming in. And it has that whole long story, right? Of like all these people that were part of that story and how it got to somebody's table. So I think that's something we all can relate with in this space. The other thing I just wanted to bring up too is that we're not a monolithic Indigenous community. And even within our own tribal communities, there's a challenge of tribal nations who have taken on, this is just my personal viewpoint that I'm sharing here, taken on models of a federal government that are still just mirroring the same systems of oppression that have been hurting our people. And we hear this in lots of other communities, even communities with extractive industry, of how, you know, counselors are in it with the money. There was just an unfortunate story coming out of Massachusetts of a council person you know, abusing their power. And so, and my first thought was like, have we held the president accountable? I mean, like, why are we, this man's getting arrested and yet, you know, and it's over like $40,000 and it's sad that that was taken from the people, of course. Like, it's totally wrong and this person needs to be held accountable and shamed for that matter. But like, why is it such a target on us? You know, when we're using the tools that the oppressor is giving us, all of a sudden we're the criminals or we're suspect. And so I guess I'm just saying that to also caution, like, just, you know, just going with any Native person isn't the right way either. And I wish there was a more clear, you know, again, just want to reiterate, like, these are my personal feelings, but I think it can get people into a lot of trouble. There was a circumstance in Nipmuc country where a well-meaning farm granted land to Native folks, but they were not the Native folks of that area. In fact, those people, that land was mirroring 4 acres of unceded territory. Like, that land has never been owned by the white man. Like, that's almost unheard of, because usually reservations are held in trust by the federal government. These are 4 acres of unceded land. There's a nearby farm, and that farm was gifted to Indigenous people that are not from that territory. Not only that, but people that have harmed our traditional leaders and our elders and have disrespected them and have never invited us into that space. And so I'm cautioning us to also not look for that quick fix. It's going to take a lot of time, but you have every right to ask some questions, not extractive questions, but questions like, oh, what are your ideas? Like, what are the possibilities? In what ways do you think this might help create access for other people? Like, just trying to get a sense too, are these folks in the we mentality, or are they in the I and the me? And this, because unfortunately that's a sad reality, that we have colonized people too. And yeah, other circumstance too is that there was one particular land trust that was running workshops that were borderline cultural appropriation. They have a whole university based on Indigenous values, and Nipmuc people had to buy some of that land back that they were willing to give available. But then it was almost like they were trying to extract some of our program ideas and activities and transitions to almost kind of sell out to their own university space. So, these are things that are real. They happen to us. And that's just another caution too, that if there is going to be any giving, it's not with this expectation that we're going to be teaching you all about our cultures and traditions or welcoming you into ceremony. It's with the understanding that you as the gifter know you didn't create the conditions, but you have a role in the outcome of what happens, and just leave it at that. And then you'll see that creator will find a way to balance, to find a way for you to see the reciprocity and just trusting and giving access and giving space.
So I'll give each of you, Suzanne, Desiree, Kristen, if there's any final thoughts or a statement that you feel like you want to repeat to really impress upon folks as we wrap up.
I've seen a lot of questions in terms of how to be better accomplices and agents for Indigenous folks. And I guess in terms of for people that are doing land returns or deciding to open up land accessibility, I know it's already been said, but kind of giving up that paternalism and that control of the outcome, or having to be at every step after that process of return, being able to trust, which could be hard if that trust is not there, but just letting go of that paternalism. And also in terms of how to be better accomplices and agents, there's a lot of education out there. So first and foremost, do the best you can educating yourselves on what is out there. There's podcasts, YouTubes, books, articles, so on and so on. And because I fully believe that all that work can't be done alone, because there is miseducation out there. There are people out there who are putting education out there that may be coming from a more colonized perspective, even though it could be coming from somebody who is Indigenous or is. So I think that they're, being able to connect with people out there who have, they're educating in a way that's not coddling or babying. It's, you know, it's uncomfortable. It's decolonized. It's not catering to, you know, tiptoe around fragility, but it's also done in a heart-centered, truthful way. And there's a lot of people out there and not expecting that, like Olivia said, you know, for free. I know that there are some people out there who do that work for free, but that emotional labor, you know, we are a peoples of, you know, reciprocity. And so even bartering or coming to some type of term of an exchange is more of a respect and appreciation. And it helps to build relationships, but it's out there. And I do encourage people to do that uncomfortable work, because at the end of the day, it's going to better our communities. It's going to save our earth, save our planet. And I don't even like to use the word save, because it's, you know, as we heal with the earth heals us. And it's just like, it's not even us swooping in and just saving the day. It's more of, you know, really the word rematriation. It's going back to how it should be, so we all can survive and thrive together, and you know, reap the benefits of planting those seeds of care and compassion and relationships of really love and respect.
I just want to offer gratitude and say thank you for everybody, for being here, for listening, for making the effort to educate yourself and hopefully to go on further. I have a very active household right now. Dinner's coming up soon, so I just want to say thank you, and everybody said amazing things. So I feel very honored to be with Desiree and Kristen. Thank you, and Olivia as well.
Yep, just gratitude. Someone's watching My Little Ones. Otherwise, we might be competing for whose space is the loudest. Olivia, great job holding this container, and thank you everyone who stayed and participated. I was watching the participant numbers, and I've been in a lot of webinars, and you see them really drop off around this time, usually over an hour. And so just a lot of gratitude, because that right there, even though we don't like to just look at numbers, that's really good feedback that that folks were engaged and being respectful of what we were offering. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for everyone listening, and for the panelists. I'm so honored to be able to share this space with you, and Olivia for connecting me and asking us really great questions and centering our voices. I think that's awesome.
Right on. Yeah, I'm just going to offer a few closing thoughts and then hand it over to Shema. I took so many notes. I learned so much. I'm really, really grateful, and I'm hopeful that yeah, we planted some seeds that folks will continue to continue to reflect on. So again, thinking about the magnitude of you know, the array of crises that, like, locally and globally we're experiencing around climate change and racial injustices, environmental disasters, right? Like, all of these things that we're living are due to this framework of human extraction and exploitation and colonialism. And that those that are the most impacted are the closest to the problem, and that we can more clearly see like the tactics of the oppression and harm. So again, thank you for like listening and listening to our experiences. So Indigenous and Black folks like must lead land and environmental justice work if we're going to expect it to be effective. It doesn't mean only our voice, but we have some strong solutions that and power really does need to be shifted to our communities, not individuals, but to our communities. And so we must remember that all of the inequities of land access, of like the outcomes of these experiences, of lives lost, of brutality, of rape, of environmental collapse, like these are all signs of a system functioning exactly as they were intended to. And again, as it was stated, 98% of all agricultural land and white ownership is a symptom of a fully functioning white supremacist settler colonial empire. This is exactly what was supposed to happen. And a piece of the reality that was not supposed to happen and that was not planned for was the degree of Black and Indigenous resistance. We have resisted complete extermination. We have resisted total subjugation. Black and Indigenous communities, we know how to fight back against imperialism. So imagine what we all collectively could accomplish if white folks gave up power to allow your Indigenous and Black relatives to lead. And so I hope you will really think in ways that cause you discomfort to think about like how you can really bravely and necessarily like support land justice work and the rematriation work where you live, the land that you occupy, because land justice work, rematriation, it benefits the security and the well-being of all of us ultimately. So thank you.
Oh, thank you all so much. That was really inspirational to have you demonstrate to all of us how this is, and I think Olivia, you said this earlier about how muddy this is and how it takes being vulnerable and being real and being okay with it being uncomfortable. And I am really grateful that you came forward and we were able to share all of that and encourage the rest of us to be okay with that muddiness and unclearness and the uncomfortable feelings that this might have brought up for people. And I want to thank the attendees for taking this time with us. Want to point out these organizations that Meg is showing now. There are places, organizations you may want to reach out to and learn more about. Also, organizations that are speaking at the conference, and we recommend you thinking about donating to them if you have means to do so. And we want to encourage you to fill out our evaluation form, and we'll get those comments back to the panelists also. That'll really help us understand what people are taking away from this session and the conference in general, and encourage you all to join us for the rest of the conference sessions tomorrow and Wednesday. Thank you all so much, and I hope you're able to enjoy your evening. Till tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then there were 4. Jeez.
I was just thinking, you all are so polite to not just boot them out.
There was,
I booted probably 5 people that were not making any moves.
you
Nice, nice.
figured it out. The first time we couldn't figure it out. The very
You know, I wish there was a way that you could say like dismiss all attendees and just like end it for the attendees.
Yeah.
I think there is a way to do that in the other.
I thought there was too. Like I can leave the meeting or I can end the meeting for all of you because this account is hosting the meeting technically. But there's no way to just push all of the attendees out and keep us in one fell swoop. Like I can remove them individually, but not ideal.
Thank you, Olivia. That was
Thank you so much, Olivia.
really
Yeah.
incredible. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back and listen to it again, I think.
And I was taking lots of notes. I
Yeah.
love hearing from them. Yeah, so it seems like I guess they're okay. They logged off, and
Okay.
I feel okay. I mean, I would if it's possible, I would appreciate being able to see any evaluations. I think it's really important to like look at feedback and always think about how to better support these sorts of conversations. So if that's possible, it would be really helpful.
Great.
Yeah. Definitely. We may not get them all in until, later in the week, but I think we can
Oh.
certainly share them. Yeah.
Yeah.
No rush. And I tend to be really like anxious. Like I don't want to read the evaluations anyway. So it's gonna take me,
Yeah.
like months to like look at it. So that's all right. No rush. Well,
Yeah.
good. You guys are coordinating so much. I hope it feels good to have this off your plate as you continue on, and I look forward to checking out more content.
Absolutely. Olivia, would you be willing to encourage Kristen to fill out that panelist intake form
Yeah.
that you guys had to take? I just need her information and regarding an honorarium
Okay.
and those pieces.
Okay.
But Suzanne and Desiree filled that out, so I'm all set with info for them.
Awesome.
Make sure that all of that gets sussed out.
Yes.
Yeah,
Can
this
you-
was such a pleasure and so much of your time, so thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you guys so
Yeah.
much.
What to commit to.
Yeah.
It's a big afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ready, and now it's dark, so it's like, all right, ready to hibernate now.
Yeah.
All right, I hope you guys can get some relaxation.
Thank
You
you.
too.
You as
Thank you,
well.
Olivia.
Okay, take care.
You
Good
too.
night.
Bye.
Good night.
Shema, I wanted to ask you real quick. We don't currently have the donation page on the land transfer slides. Would you like to add that in?
I don't know, Sarah, what do you think? It's like not directly related to anything we're talking about. I think I'm happy to say it though, in any case. What do
Is
you
it
think?
up on the conference webpage? Because someone had asked about that. And I think that would be the best way to communicate it, would be just to have it on our webpage so people can see it.
Okay. Yeah, I think we could ask Rachel to add that on there. That should be fine.
Yeah, I do
and I
think I
also-
want it for affording farmland, but
Yeah, it's in
because
all of
New
the
Roots is
others.
going to be there. So
Yeah.
Well, Meg, let's just put it in, maybe even instead of the thank you, like I
Okay.
did right now, just because I don't know, it's more picturesque and it gives something
Yeah.
for people
That's
and I can linger as much as I want or not.
okay. That
I'm
sounds good. And I also just wanted to point out that that's the session, obviously, that has Indian Head Farm involved in it. So I don't anticipate that there will be any commentary tomorrow from guests, but it's just something we might want to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, it
Tell
was
the
on my
owner.
radar, it was on my radar like before it even came up today.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a
and
little
so,
while. Yeah. Or
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I just don't want Janet to like be caught off guard with.
Yeah, I think
have
Janet
a
should know.
halfway drafted email already to them to just
Okay.
let them know it officially came up today.
Okay. Is it something that they've ever kind of brought up on their own with you?
Yeah, not anything about like changing the name, but that that their
They
family
acknowledge what that.
owned it since the 1700s and that's interesting to grapple with.
Yeah. So it's not like
so I don't get,
appeal
it's
to them.
not like they're not hardcore about it by any means. From my interaction, yeah, I'm not sure exactly how it would fully hit them. But I'm gonna give them a heads up and offer to talk to them if they want more info before we meet. I expect it to be a very different crowd tomorrow. So like you, I don't think it will come up, but I do want them to be aware.
Okay.
Yeah, if it does, they should know how to address it
Yeah.
in a way that feels comfortable to them.
Mhm.
Great. Feeling good about other things, logistics, and how that all went? Can end this.
I think the logistics went super smooth.
Yeah,
Good.
it was great. Thank you for being behind the scenes and making everything happen. I think that it is going to be different for the other sessions. I think people were really just listening and taking in what was being said, and
Yeah.
we weren't getting flooded with questions. I think because really people were just listening that's what I was doing, at least, is like, I
Yeah.
just want to hear what you have to say. I don't have anything to really ask about. So that's one thing I think might be different. It's just
Yeah.
interesting how that unfolded.
I'm also sort of prepared that it might be more of the same, that people might show up at least, yeah, especially because they're in webinar format, that people might be more inclined to like sit and listen, hear from the.
True. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, yeah, let's prepare lots of questions, like we said, and then we'll be ready if it is similar. And yeah, we'll just see.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really great presentation. I do want to listen again, because there were parts that I didn't pick up on that were so interesting, and I just think I would get more from listening again, like the whole dialogue between Kristen and Desiree around like different tribal identities was really interesting. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Is there anything that you need before tomorrow's session, Shema?
I don't think so. I'm gonna go like work on my land acknowledgement because I still wasn't quite sure how I wanted to do all that, but I don't.
Okay.
From your end, I think we're good. Did we end up doing a poll at the?
This is I added this slide. Hello, there we go. At the end of the session, after upcoming sessions, it goes here. Is that
Okay.
was that your
Oh,
thought?
right. Yeah. Is that where I should go?
And I believe we do have 2 polls in yours.
Okay. Super.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think we're good.
All right.
Mm-hmm. And I just noticed it's still recording now, so I guess maybe a little editing when you get the recording.
Oh
to
yeah,
cut out the
I'm
beginning
gonna
and
like
end.
trim the start and the finish of them. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm gonna watch tomorrow, Shema, so I'll be in the background.
Uh-oh.